Montana Territory, autumn of 1873, just past dawn the wind sharp, the dirt road colder than death. Etta Calloway's knees scraped raw against the gravel, her threadbare skirt dragging behind her like the tail of a dying bird. Her arms trembled from the weight of her baby, a swaddled bundle pressed tight to her chest. The boy's name was Noah. He was barely 2 months old, too small for this world, but she had nothing else to give him except forward motion. She had not eaten in 2 days. Her boots were gone hawked for a half loaf of bread back in Billings. And now she crawled. Crawled because her legs had stopped holding her upright 12 miles ago. Crawled because every mile behind her echoed with a man's drunken voice and the sting of the last time he hit her. The baby stirred against her chest and let out a faint, hungry cry. Etta paused, forehead against the dirt, shoulders shaking. She whispered, "I got you, baby, I got you," though she had nothing at all. A distant thud of hooves broke through the silence. She tried to lift her head, blinked through dust and tears. A rider was coming fast, a brown horse cutting sharp along the road, dust curling behind it like smoke. Her heart stuttered. She turned slightly, shielding Noah. The horse slowed to a trot, then stopped altogether a few feet away. The man dismounted in one clean motion. He was tall, probably 30 or so, lean with a broad chest under a worn sheepskin coat. His hair was dark and swept back from his face, and his jaw was dusted with a few days' worth of beard. There was something gentle in the way he looked at her, though his eyes were sharp and full of worry. "Ma'am," he said low, kneeling beside her, "what happened?" Etta could not answer. Her throat had no voice left. She just clutched Noah tighter and tried to breathe. He looked at the baby, then back at her. "You cannot stay in this road. Let me help." She shook her head once, not out of refusal but fear. She had trusted help before, and it had nearly ended her. Still, the man did not move away. "My name's Prescott Palmer. I run a ranch about 12 miles west. You and the baby, you need warmth, food, and rest. You will not make it another mile like this." Etta's lips parted. Her voice came out hoarse. "Please, do not take my baby." Prescott's face softened. "Ma'am, I would never. I just want to get you both out of the cold." He reached down slow as rain and lifted her first, careful with her weight. She was light as nothing. Then he picked up the baby, cradling him in one arm while steadying Etta with the other. Without a word, he walked them both to his horse and swung up into the saddle. He held Etta in front of him, Noah tucked safe against her. The ride was quiet, save the baby's soft breaths and the feel of Prescott's arm around her. Etta leaned back just enough to not fall. She was too tired to fear him now. His warmth seeped through her thin clothes, and the steady rhythm of the ride dulled the edge of panic still lodged in her chest. They reached his ranch near midday. The place looked lived in and strong white fencing, a red barn, a 2-story house with smoke curling from the chimney. A dog barked once, then ran up, tail wagging. Prescott dismounted, helped Etta down, and held Noah like he had done it 100 times before. Inside, the house smelled of firewood and stew. Prescott laid the baby in a small cradle near the hearth, then helped Etta into a chair. She winced as her knees bent, blood crusted along her shins. "You need food first," he said, already ladling stew into a bowl, "and a bath. Then we will talk." Etta watched him. He moved with the quiet steadiness of someone who had seen a lot but did not need to talk about it. There was no wife's touch in the home. No child's toys, just a man who lived simple and alone. She ate slow, spoon shaking in her hand. Prescott sat across from her, not speaking, just watching, making sure she was all right. When she finished, he nodded. "I can heat water for a bath. There is a room upstairs you can rest in." "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked, voice barely above a whisper. Prescott leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Because I saw a woman crawling down a road with her baby, and no decent man would let that be the end of her story." Her eyes burned. She looked down, ashamed of the tears that came. Prescott stood. "You are safe here. You do not have to tell me anything until you want to, But you and that boy, you have a place now." She nodded, unable to speak. That night, Etta bathed for the first time in weeks. She wrapped herself in a clean dress left on the bed and stood looking out the window at the quiet land beyond. Noah slept in a cradle beside her. Prescott had given them his own room and taken the small cot downstairs. She lay down beside her son, her fingers brushing his cheek. For the first time in months, she felt no fear when she closed her eyes. Downstairs, Prescott stared into the firelight, his jaw tight. He had not expected to find anyone on the road, much less a woman and her baby broken near to death, but holding her in the saddle that had done something to him. The way she had leaned back, trusting him just enough not to fall. The way she had whispered to her baby even when she could barely breathe. He had no one. No family left. But maybe, just maybe, he was not meant to be alone forever. And maybe neither was she. By the third day, the swelling in Etta's legs had eased enough to let her stand without trembling. The bruises along her arms had turned yellow at the edges. She moved quiet, with care, always checking on Noah before doing anything else. Prescott noticed she kept her boots tucked beneath the bed, though she never wore them inside. She folded clothes with practiced hands, as if used to doing more than her share with little praise. Prescott was out early that morning, hammering a loose board back onto the chicken coop. The frost hadn't come yet, but the nights were sharper than they had been. He'd seen her watching from the window once, holding Noah against her shoulder. She hadn't come outside since he brought her here. When he came in for breakfast, she was already at the stove, stirring a pot of cornmeal mush. She didn't look up. "You didn't need to do that," he said, setting his gloves on the table. "I know," she replied, voice flat but not cold. "I wanted to." He poured water from the kettle into a tin cup. "You cook like someone who's done it every day." "I worked in a boarding house kitchen in Helena." Before. She didn't offer more, and he didn't press. He sat down, nodding when she spooned food into a bowl for him. She served herself last, then settled across from him. Noah was asleep again, bundled on the cot by the hearth. Prescott ate a few bites before asking, "You think you'll be up to walking the yard today?" She glanced toward the door. "Maybe. I've got to mend some fence down by Cotton Creek. It's not far, but I'll be gone a few hours. You'd be here alone." Etta looked at him then, eyes steady. "I can manage. I'm not afraid of being alone." He wiped his mouth with the cloth hanging from his belt. "If you take Noah out, watch for the barn cat. He's meaner than he looks." Her mouth twitched almost a smile. "I'll keep him close." Prescott stood and took his hat from the peg. He paused at the door. "If you need anything, I keep the shotgun behind the woodbox, just in case." She gave a small nod, not startled but thoughtful. "Thank you." The wind had picked up by the time he reached the lower fence line. He worked with a rhythm, driving nails, stretching wire, keeping his mind on the task. Still, now and again, he caught himself thinking of her, how she'd stood a little straighter that morning, how she'd met his eyes without flinching. When he returned near sundown, the lantern was lit in the window. Inside, the air smelled faintly of apples. She'd peeled and cooked the last of the orchard's fruit down into sauce, set it cooling near the window. Noah rested in a basket lined with soft flannel, one hand curled near his cheek. Etta sat sewing near the fire, her hair braided back, sleeves rolled to the elbow. She looked up as he entered. "You patch clothes too?" he asked, shrugging off his coat. "There's not much I don't know how to mend." Prescott chuckled low. "You planning to fix the roof next?" "I might. If you keep feeding me." He crossed to the hearth, crouched to check on the baby. "He's sleeping solid." "He does that after a bath." Prescott looked at her then, more directly. "You got everything you need for him. I've got milk goats if you run low. I boiled what you left." "He takes it slow, but he's holding weight." He nodded, easing down into the chair across from her. The crackle of the fire filled the silence for a while, then Etta set her needle aside. "I'd like to earn my place here, not just take it." Prescott leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I didn't bring you here to owe me, I know, but I want to stay, if you'll let me help." He studied her, the way her hands rested calm in her lap, the steadiness in her voice. "I've got more than enough work to share." "If you're sure." "I'm sure." He stood again, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. "Well then, tomorrow you can help me with the root cellar. It's due for clearing." She nodded once. "All right." He hesitated, then added, "I'll sleep out in the lean-to if you'd rather have the house to yourself." "That's not necessary," she said quietly. "The cot's fine where it is." He didn't say more, just tipped his head and headed outside to check the barn doors before night settled in. That night, after the fire had burned low, Etta sat a while by the cradle. She touched Noah's tiny foot beneath the blanket, her heart steady for the first time in a long while. Prescott hadn't asked her about the bruises. He hadn't asked why she'd been crawling that road. He hadn't pitied her. He'd just given her room. She looked toward the cot where he slept, one arm over his eyes, breathing even. She didn't know what this place would become, but for the first time she let herself wonder what it might feel like to stay. Not just to survive, but to choose. The cellar was colder than the wind outside, with stone walls that held the chill like a secret. Etta stood knee-deep in burlap sacks and straw baskets, sorting through what remained of last year's harvest: soft onions, thinning potatoes, and apples gone to rot. Prescott worked beside her, sleeves rolled, carrying out the spoiled and hauling in crates of salted meat he'd smoked himself. Etta didn't speak until the room was nearly cleared. "What happened to your family?" she asked, wiping her palms on her skirt. Prescott paused halfway through setting down a barrel of beans. He rested his hands on the rim, quiet a moment. "My mother died the same winter the war ended. Father followed the spring after. Fever took them." She didn't move, only listened. "My brother enlisted, never came back from Chickamauga. After that, I rode north. Worked freight wagons out of Kansas City a few years. Got this land with the last of my pay." She nodded once, the silence deepening. "I lost my mother when I was 15. She got caught in a cattle crush at the stockyards in Ogden. My pa drank himself to death after." Prescott looked at her, his face unreadable. "That why you went to Helena?" She met his gaze. "That's where the work was. I thought if I stayed long enough, someone might see me." He didn't ask what came next. She was grateful for that. They worked until dusk pulled the light from the sky. When they stepped outside again, frost had rimmed the fence rails, and the mountains stood quiet in the distance, shouldering the last gold streaks of sunlight. That night, Etta stitched a new cover for the cradle from scraps she found in a trunk. She sat cross-legged on the floor while Noah slept, her needle rising and falling in a rhythm that felt older than words. Prescott sat nearby, carving a latch from a strip of pine, his hands steady, the knife whispering through the grain. "You want children?" she asked without looking up. He set the latch aside. "I never figured I'd have cause to think on it." She threaded a new length of blue cotton. "You're good with him. I see how you carry him." Prescott leaned back in the chair. "I've seen enough men raise children out of duty and not care. If I ever did, I'd want it to be for the right reason, with someone who'd stand beside me." She tied off the thread with a firm pull. "I thought I had that once. He was quiet at first, then he started pushing. Always made it sound like it was my fault when things went wrong." Prescott didn't interrupt. "I stayed too long. I thought maybe if I fixed enough, he'd stop breaking things. You were never the one who needed fixing." Etta placed the finished cover over Noah's sleeping form, smoothing it with a hand that didn't tremble. "I know that now." The fire snapped in the hearth, and for a while neither of them spoke. Prescott's shadow stretched long behind him, cast by flame and lamplight. Etta stood slowly and crossed to the table. She poured 2 cups of water and handed one to him. He took it without a word. Their fingers brushed. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked quietly. "I did," he said, watching the rim of his cup. "But every time I got close, I'd think about the fence lines needing mending or the horses needing breaking. There's a kind of peace in staying put. I never had a place that didn't feel borrowed. This one, it feels steady." He looked at her then, really looked. It's not borrowed, not if it's shared. She sat beside him, her shoulder close to his. They didn't touch again, but the space between them no longer felt like something to cross, it felt like something already closing. She rested her chin in her hand, watching the fire. I don't know where I belong yet, but I'd like to find out slowly. You've got time, he said. And you've got here. She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. Then I'll stay. For now, Prescott reached for the latch he'd carved, turning it over in his hands. I could show you how to work the forge if you're curious. It's quiet work, but honest. I'd like that. The baby stirred then, a small sound that brought Etta to her feet before the second cry. She lifted Noah with practiced ease, holding him close. Prescott watched her, steady and unhurried, as if he'd seen something he hadn't known he'd needed. She rocked the child gently, her voice low. He was born under a black sky, no moon. It was raining. Prescott stood. Then maybe it's time he saw a morning worth remembering. Etta nodded, her gaze never leaving Noah's face. Maybe it's time all three of us did. The following week came with a shift in the wind, warmer, but restless, carrying the scent of wet soil and the whisper of change. Etta stood on the back porch with her sleeves cuffed just below the elbow, a pail of water cooling by her feet, and Noah wrapped snug to her chest in a sling she'd sewn from an old grain sack. Prescott had left at dawn to barter lumber at a neighboring homestead, and for the first time since arriving, she wasn't counting the hours until he returned. She scrubbed the porch rail with a rag, the motion steady, her mind quieter than it had been in years. The baby slept, the rise and fall of his breath ticking gently against her ribs. Across the yard, the dog watched a squirrel dart along the fence, tail twitching. When the wagon returned mid-afternoon, she heard it before she saw its wooden wheels creaking over the packed earth, the horse's gait uneven. Prescott climbed down slow, favoring his left foot. She left the pail where it was and crossed the yard. What happened? Wheel hit a sinkhole near the bend. Horse pulled up short, sent me down hard. He lifted his pant leg to show a swollen ankle, red and stiff. She took his arm without asking and helped him to the steps. You shouldn't be walking on it. I wasn't planning to, he muttered, wincing as he sat. Just needed to get the wagon back before dark. She crouched in front of him and pressed her fingers gently around the joint, not broken. But you won't be mending any fences tomorrow. He let out a breath through his nose. Reckon you'll have to keep the ranch from falling to pieces then. I already started, she said, standing. The east trough's clean, chickens fed. You've got 3 eggs waiting in the kitchen. He looked at her differently then, not startled, but like a man who'd found something unexpected and couldn't quite name it. You didn't need to do all that. She picked up the pail. I didn't do it for thanks. That evening, she heated willow bark in water and wrapped his ankle with the soaked cloths. He sat still, watching the fire, his shirt collar open at the throat. The room smelled of pine resin and the faint sweetness of the apple sauce cooling by the window. You always this stubborn? She asked, adjusting the cloth. Only when it matters. She tied the wrap off and sat back on her heels. You could have stayed in town, taken a job with less risk. I tried, drove freight for a while, slept in rooms with no windows, ate from tin plates. I'd rather break my ankle on my own land than keep 2 feet under someone else's roof. She understood that more than she could say. He glanced at her hands, then up to her face. You're not just passing through anymore, are you? No, he nodded once. Later, she sat by the hearth feeding Noah, the lantern throwing soft light against the walls. Prescott's foot rested on a stool, his eyes closed, head tilted back. You ever miss being around folks? She asked. Sometimes, he murmured, not opening his eyes. But then I remember the noise. I used to think I needed noise, a full room, someone always talking. Now I think I just needed someone who listened. I listen. I know, she said. That's why I'm still here. He opened his eyes then, slow and deliberate. And if I said I wanted you to stay? Not just for the work, not just for the boy. She didn't look away. I want to know what that means to you. Prescott leaned forward, the firelight catching the edge of his jaw. Means I'd make room for you here. Room in the day, room at the table, room in the years ahead. Means if you ever felt ready, there'd be a place beside me, not behind, not beneath. Beside. She was quiet for a long moment when I left, she said. I didn't think I'd ever want to let someone in again, but this place, it's not just a roof. It feels like breath. He watched her, still and steady. I'm not asking for promises, she added, but I'd like to build something, slow, with care. Prescott nodded. Then we'll build. She smiled then, not with her mouth, but with the softness in her eyes. Noah stirred in her arms, his small hand curling into her dress. She held him close, and for the first time since he'd been born, she didn't feel like they were running from something. They were standing on something. Firm, real, and she wasn't standing alone. Prescott leaned his weight on the cane Etta had fashioned from a piece of ashwood, cut clean and smoothed with care. His ankle had begun to mend, slow but sure, and the late October sun lay easy across the hills beyond the pasture. The last of the leaves clung to the cottonwoods like copper coins, and the sky had settled into that clean, hard blue that only came before snow. Etta was outside the barn, sleeves rolled, brushing down the mare that had gone skittish since the last thunderstorm. She moved with quiet precision, one hand steady at the shoulder, the other working the curricomb in tight, practiced circles. The baby lay asleep in a basket bed of wool and flannel, tucked in the shade of the fence post where she could see him. Prescott watched her from the porch, admiring the way she didn't rush anything, not the task, not the moment. She had never asked for more than what was in front of her, but he'd seen the way her eyes filled with thought when she thought no one was looking. You always this gentle with horses? He asked, stepping down carefully. They raid you, she said, not turning. If you come in too loud, they remember it. She blew softly against the mare's muzzle, and the animal leaned into her hand. Same with people. He leaned against the gate post, watching the way her braids slipped over her shoulder when she turned. I got word from town. The freight company's asking about winter contracts. I could take it. She glanced at him. Would it keep you from the land? I'd ride 3 days out, 3 back. Might be gone a week at a time. Etta straightened, brushing hay from her skirt. And you'd come back to what? He met her gaze, the corner of his mouth tilting. To you. If you'd have it. She stepped closer, the mare snorting behind her. I've had enough of men leaving with one story and returning with another. If you go, I need to know you're coming home the same man. I won't go if it costs that. She looked up at him, eyes not soft but sure. Then we decide together what kind of life we want, what kind of raising Noah's going to know. He nodded once, the weight of it settling like a stone that fit perfectly in his palm. I've been thinking on something, he said, voice low. Not just work, not just staying, but standing beside you. As more than just the man who gave you shelter. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. You mean marriage? I do. Not for show and not for saving face, for building something with you, long and quiet and real. Etta's fingers found the edge of the gate. She traced the grain of the wood, then looked up at him. I told myself I'd never wear a ring again. You don't have to, he said. I can carve you a band from willow or none at all. She stepped forward, close enough to feel the warmth of his breath. But if I did, she said, it'd be because I wanted to. Not because I needed protection or a name, just because I knew where I belonged. And do you? He asked. She didn't answer with words. She took his hand, rough and worn, and pressed it over her heart. That night, they sat on the porch while Noah slept inside, wrapped in a quilt Etta had pieced together from Prescott's old shirts. The stars came down like frost, and the air smelled of wood smoke and earth. She leaned against his shoulder, his arm curled around her waist. I never thought I'd find peace on a ranch tucked between hills, she said. I never thought I'd find it in someone who showed up crawling down the road with nothing but her child and her will. She smiled, resting her cheek against him. And now, he said, I can't imagine a day without you in it. They were married 2 days later, just after sunrise. No preacher, no papers, just hands joined in the field behind the barn, with the wind in the grass and the baby blinking up at the sky. She wore a dress she'd dyed with walnut and stitched herself. He wore the same coat he'd worn the day he found her. Prescott made her a ring from the branch of the apple tree that had managed to bloom late that year. She wore it on a leather cord around her neck. They built a second cradle before the next spring, when Etta's belly began to swell. She still kept to the chores, but Prescott wouldn't let her lift the milk pails once her back began to ache. Noah started walking that same month, toddling toward the chickens with arms wide and a grin full of teeth. They added a room to the house before the snow came. Etta painted the walls with crushed berries and ash, a soft gray blue that reminded her of morning frost. Prescott built a shelf for her sewing things and carved a tiny horse for Noah's first birthday. Sometimes they still sat by the fire without speaking, the silence between them full as any song. And when the wind blew hard across the prairie, Etta would hold Prescott's hand and say, "I'm not afraid of storms anymore." And he'd answer, "That's because you're home."